your relationship between all the translation that you did of the Alexander Yanai material and just being steeped in that, and the way that you're organizing the way that the solvents and glue kind of came about. Do you see a connection there?
Well, I can't separate anything I do because it's sort
Yeah.
of like, yeah, my upbringing was so steeped with Dr. Feldenkrais. Um, it's very hard for me to separate any way of my thinking for that. I mean, I started when I was 18. So, I mean, I'm now 62. This is as long as I've been doing it. And when I got involved in the Alexander Yanai work, when Dr. Feldenkrais gave me the lessons to teach at the Feldenkrais Institute, I always had the understanding that my time was limited for previous experiences of when people are sick around you, you know they're gonna the time will end at some point. So I had that from my own personal life history, family history, and I knew that when I was with Dr. Feldenkrais. So when I had the access to working with the materials, I would do them day and night. So it was sort of like I was so occupied, and then for years and years, I taught hundreds and hundreds of classes. I had a 20 something classes a week in Tel Aviv that I would do. So my initial thinking is of those lessons as lessons is a basis for structurality, you could say, if that's a word, methodology of the way he made his progressions and the types of ways that he would use the variations to create very specific changes in movement. And then, of course, in my basis of developing into a Feldenkrais trainer, seeing how this happens over a 4-year period as an educational director. So for me, what according to your question, I think my liberation to being able to use how I trained myself for so many years was stopping teaching the Alexander Yanai material, because I noticed that this was a very limiting format for me, that I only could think in these lessons, that those were the lessons. But that has nothing to do with the Feldenkrais method. This is just one form that the thinking took and Dr. Feldenkrais put it into. But the basis of it has a thinking behind it. The biomechanics of the way he put them into the way his Alexander Yanai lessons, or that series, or San Francisco, wherever he taught his lessons, was one direction that he used them in, and how he put them together. So, so my liberation from that came when I sort of decided, in a very Feldenkraisian way, I was going to inhibit my habits and not teach that material whatsoever, and challenge myself to see what do I understand of this method and what can I teach if I don't use that, or if I don't use Amherst or San Francisco or Esalen or anything. And I found it quite extraordinary, because I could think that stuff and give the numbers, and I have a very sort of photographic mind when I learn things in that way. The numbers and the series, and I'd see them in Hebrew and I'd see them in the English volumes, etc. But when I got through that and left it alone and really did not use any of the material, I started to see that I had this biomechanical understanding that is a springboard for creativity in movement. But it has to follow certain methodological lines. It has a methodology to it to bring about change. So certainly when I would look at how to use and isolate or build a sequence, I didn't think like I'm saying, I didn't think Alexander Yanai, but the thinking of how to create a sequence for change is sort of part of me. I can't separate it any longer. But I don't think in lessons in that way, in any kind of a way. So
Mhm.
I can't separate the methodology that I use in my thinking about movement from my original training. But I don't teach those materials in any way, not in JKA, because it's developmental based, and this is something completely different than a Feldenkrais use of materials for what they're used for with adults. And this is something completely different. So the basis of the thinking, I can't separate from who I am, which is trained by Dr. Feldenkrais in this way of thinking. But I noticed that You take the way of thinking and you make applications to different domains. If you can only use a limited amount of pre-prescribed material from somebody else, I see that there's something limiting, and this is something that you're looking for as a Feldenkrais way of thinking to sort of either notice and liberate yourself, or see, can you do it or not do it? So that's me.
I love that. Something that I appreciate a lot about solvents and glue is the sequence, is the sequential aspect of it. So it's not like this random movement and then this other little thing and this other, the way that it builds. And I feel like that is really resonant with my experiences of your teaching in general, just the sequential nature of what you're doing. And can you say some more about that? Like how that is important to you, or
Sequence.
how you think about sequence? Yeah. The interest level, just in my own experience with this way that you build, it's like my whole entire brain is lit up with this curiosity and this like, what is next? And whoa, this, it's very distinct of a quality of your teaching. And it's very much a part of why solvents and glue is really.
But that's in all my teaching. The history of it, I can tell you, I know very clearly why. You want to hear it? Okay.
Yes.
Sure. So you asked me last time about this. I think the Feldenkrais Alexander Yanai, and I explained to you why I stopped teaching it. But when I was teaching it, the way I started was, first of all, the Dr. Feldenkrais and his brother Baruch, who ran at that time the publishing house and the institute. They gave me the job of running the Alexander Yanai tapes. So I had the access to all the tapes. They was available to me constantly. He was available to me when I would have questions. When I think about them now, I can't believe that I would ask such questions to him, but he answered. So I would go and I would watch these, I would run the tape, I would do them myself, and then I'd run the tapes and I'd watch the people doing it. So I got to observe the people doing without me having to be the instructor.
There was video. You said you would watch the tape? No.
I would watch the people doing, I would put on the tapes at the class, and I get to have him teach the class, and I watch, basically, right?
I see.
So I could see, and I could have, now he was in the Alexander Yanai materials, from what I remember, they're very sequential. They have a very specific and distinct order and a timing, and et cetera, et cetera. So that was one aspect. I like structure. Originally, I was when I played music, I was a drummer. So I like sequence, I like rhythm, I like structure, and I follow that. So the second aspect was when I started my own private practice. After I was doing, Feldenkrais had passed away, and I started my own private practice. I took over the studio of Gabi Aron. She was one of she's long passed away in 1995. She was one of my main teachers, and she was really quite profound in her teaching. So anyway, the students that I used to have, I think it was 21 classes a week with 16, 17 people in the class. Okay, in Israel it's very different. People would come weekly all year round, except in the summertime, twice a week, and you register for a month, and it's not like it is now. You register for a certain specific thing, and you're in your themes, and you have this, totally different scene. So I would have to teach sometimes in a day, 1, 2, 3, 4, 7 classes a day, like 8:15, 9:15, 10:15, and then 4, 5, 6, 7, I think in the evening, something like that. So I wouldn't prepare every time what we were doing. And then one time I remember I was teaching, talking with her about teaching. I mean, how do I understand? It wasn't books to understand the lessons, and there was nobody around to teach anything. Feldenkrais was gone. All these people were gone. There was no San Francisco people in Israel. There was only the Israelis, and they were all gone. They were teaching all over the world at that point. So she said to me, if you want to know what the lessons are about, you have to be able to break them down and see what they're about. So what I would do is I would start in the morning, and I would take a particular lesson, and I would want to see if the people understood the lesson. or if they knew, not understood the lesson in the way, if they would notice if I would change something, take something in, take it out. So I would take, say, one lesson, and I would teach it all day Monday, and then I had all day Tuesday, another 6 or 7 lessons, and then I would have a break on Wednesday, and then Thursday. In Israel it's Sunday, Monday, and then Tuesdays off, and then Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday's weekend in Israel. So what I would do is I would just take the lesson, and then I would just sort of rip it apart in a certain way, break it down. And then I would try to see if I would just talk slowly and easily to the people, and I would just make it nice and pleasant and how they would lie on their back. But I would jumble up the movements that would have no sense to them whatsoever. Would they get up and they feel good? Or would they notice it's any different? Right? Or would I get different results? So basically what I started to do is I started to break down lessons. But I think it's my nature, but this was from her suggestion of how to do it, break down into components. So then I started to see what are building blocks of lessons, what are things that need to be used, what fits together, what doesn't fit together, because you learn about resonance. You can't understand resonance without dissonance. So if you can feel the dissonance, or you can understand why doesn't it fit together and why does it, which is the difference between sort of creative slow movement and creating an ATM. Correct. It has to have a structure that builds up, that creates a process where things will change for all the different reasons. And then you can understand why you can produce a particular result at the end. So it fits in with myself, because music, you have laws to it, and you have ways that you put it together and you break it apart. And then there's music that sounds in all different ways, and drumming, of course, because it's rhythmical. So this is what I did. And then I understood, I started to be able to create my own. This is the first time I started to create lessons and variations on themes and go off in my own directions. And, I could make up things that it would sort of, I could put 4 lessons together. And if I would talk really nicely and do it at a slow pace, some people, they would just love it. Some people, boy, that was strange. And other people say, wow, that was so great. And then you would never know. But if you want to see a very specific result from a group, then you have to really do it in a certain sequential way to understand why, what fits together. And this somehow, I always used to try to teach ATM to my trainees like this. But what I discovered, so this is this is what fits with me. And this is how my teaching is. This is how I did with my functional integration as well. The same thing. I would stop my functional integration lesson and I would say, what did I just do? Why did I do that? How did it work? And is it functional integration or is it not? Why is it? Why is it not? How do these components fit together? How do they build up? How do they fit into what I'm trying to do? And not just, swim through a session in a pleasant way and touch nicely to the people. So this follows me through in all my types of work. I wrote a book on Feldenkrais time ago. Can't see it. It's in Hebrew. It says Feldenkrais on it. But I had it then. I have all sorts of sequences in the book. Okay. Visual sequences and sequences that I build up, etc., etc. I can't find a German version. Oh, here it is. This was my first book. Second book coming out soon, very soon. So, long time ago, 1990 or so like that. I think 88 I wrote it. So anyway, so I build up sequences, and the same thing, my mind works that way, works in the child development, it works in the Feldenkrais, and it's the same aspect that I was able to put into developing the solvents and glue, because it has to be something for me that's repeatable, it has to be sequential, and it has to have an order that you can, that's malleable, that can be moved around. And it's not just something that depends on my own particular type of creativity or thinking. It has to have a buildup. If it doesn't fit and you can't build it onto something else, yes, you can start a whole new process, but it has to have some way that it connects to something else. So that's my way of thinking. Because it's also teaching. If you teach and you can't build up a theme, it doesn't mean that you can't start with a few themes and then put them together for people, but it has to have some way that people can make sense of it. So you can say, yes, they will make sense of it by themselves, or you bring it, particularly in this type of a way, that it will create a certain type of result in the end. And with the solvents and glue in particular, you have to have a particular basis to build off of. Otherwise, the rest of it can't work
Mhm.
mechanically.
Mhm. Mhm.
Okay. So the sequence is really super important.